Alrighty, let's jump into this. Today I'm going to cover assignment 4 in a fair amount of detail. I'm also going to talk a little bit about how to build a UI or some principles around building a UI in Python in the command line. UI, of course, means user interface. So it's creating an environment where anybody who uses your program kind of knows what they're supposed to do, giving them good prompts, making it look as reasonably attractive as you can with a command line program, that sort of thing. And then I'm sort of going to talk to you a little bit about how to think about, or some ways to possibly think about programs and the structure of a program as we get into more complicated programs, because that's going to trip up a lot of you as we start getting into longer programs and more complicated programs with branching and loops and things like that. Keeping things sort of organized and approaching in a logical way is sometimes helpful. So I'm going to give you some structure around that. So first, just to quickly review, we talked about this last time with the if statement, right? If something is true, so any expression that can evaluate to true or false. Then we have a colon. Next line is indented, and any subsequent lines that get executed if this is true. And the two key things there are the colon and the next line being indented. So just to be very clear, everything that gets executed, if this is true, needs to be indented. And then when you stop indenting, that's the end of this code block that gets executed. So I had a few people in the last section of the class who indented the first line and then didn't indent after that. And then they had below that an else. And the else was giving them an error because that code block between here and the else wasn't indented. And so the else didn't make sense to Python, because else should only follow indented code so that it can match it up with an if. If you put an else with no if, then it doesn't know what it's doing instead of, if that makes sense. So again, we have if with an expression, elif with an expression that shouldn't be true if this is true, right? These should not be both true at the same time. It's not going to necessarily throw an error, but it will behave unexpectedly. And if this is true, it won't even look at this to see if it's true. So the first time it hits something that's true, it stops, does that code, and then moves on with its life. Else is the everything else. So if nothing else is true, then do this. Else is optional. You can leave it off. So that this is true, or just do nothing. So there are lots of combinations, but you can't have an elif without an if. You can't have an else without an if. Assignment 4 is to build an advanced calculator. It's not really advanced. I should probably call it something else. The only thing that's what's that? Maybe a semi-advanced, or I could just say like 2 calculators and 1 program, although that sounds a bit fishy as well. So basically, you're building a single program that has a main menu that allows the user to choose one of 2 calculators that will then take input from the user and produce a calculation. It's not supposed to be advanced calculations. You can if you want. I want you to be creative and have freedom to be creative. But literally, a Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion is just fine. You could do one calculator that converts Celsius to Fahrenheit, another one that converts Fahrenheit to Celsius. That's plenty to satisfy the requirements of the assignment, because what I really want you to focus on here is the structure of your code, not being great at doing calculations. Okay, so the user needs to be able to choose between the 2 calculators from some kind of a menu, and I want you to work on making a nice user interface. So make it look good, tell the user what they're doing, give them logical choices, tell them how they're supposed to respond, give them good feedback. So those sorts of things. Before we get into the details of the assignment, I want to talk about user interface. Now, this is what qualifies as a nice looking user interface in the command line. We don't have graphics, we don't have buttons, we don't have anything flashy. So we use good old-fashioned text characters. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so like when you do have like a program that has graphics being executed, like some people have like programs with like cartoons talking. How do they do that?
Well, there's a number of different libraries that they can use, and we will get to those in the last 3 sections of the class with the graphical user interface. Yeah, yeah. So, but when you're talking about command line, this is it. It's magical, I know. But this is, so we use text characters typically to make things look nice. You can see I've got kind of a title here set apart, and then I've got kind of a menu that tells the user what to pick. And then I have a nice prompt that sort of tells them what to do. So that's what I'm talking about. It's kind of a low bar if you think about it. It's not really complicated. But in order to get there, I need to share with you how Python views the world. So when I print hello world in Python, each character here is filling in one space on this grid. In the Python world, the default line width, so from here to here, is 80 characters wide. That goes all the way back to when we had screens that could only display 80 characters across. Before graphics, before all the fun stuff, before we were playing Fortnite, 80 characters across, that's what you could do. Python goes back that far. It's just sort of kept that as a convention. You don't have to have 80 character line width. In fact, I don't care if you choose that or something else. It's the only thing that's good about that as a convention is that if somebody's computer is set up to run command line Python, they will probably have it set up to display 80 characters wide. So if you're creating a program that you want to be able to run on multiple different computers, then that's a good thing because you know that whatever you create will run on anybody's Python interface. So it's kind of like just an agreed upon convention, just like language. If I say hello in English, we all agree, if we know English, that that word means a certain thing, and then I can communicate. It's the same thing with this. Agreeing on a convention allows that program to be run elsewhere. All that to say is, everything we print in Python is printed into a grid in the mind of Python like this. So this grid being 80 characters wide, every character has the same space, whether it's this little skinny exclamation point or this W, which appears wide. Every character, one space per character, a period, a hyphen, an underscore, any character, one space. That allows us to do some cool things like aligning multiple lines of text in a certain way or aligning them on the right side without even knowing how long those lines of text are. It allows us to do ASCII art, which I'm sure you've seen. One of my previous classes was really cool. I had a student who was into ASCII art, and she actually, there's an assignment, I think it's in a week or two, where we do rock, paper, scissors, but she actually drew hands doing rock, paper, scissors in ASCII art. I don't expect anything like that from any of you, but just all that to say, you can do quite a bit with just text characters. You can get pretty creative. But we don't have to be creative. We can be boring like this, and I can create a user interface or a menu header like this with just a few lines of code. And guess what? I don't have to type the number sign exactly 80 times. If I print this line of text, I don't have to sit there and go 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't have to do that. It's kind of nice. Python has some shortcuts for us that allow us to do things quite easy. Like this. If I want to print 80 number signs, I just use a print function and I pass it this in quotes. So the string of a number sign times 80. That's it. Boom, it's done. It'll just print 80 of those. I get a little bit more advanced, and there are a center and a left justify and a right justify functions. These are string functions. So I can pass it number sign times 9. This phrase, Bill's calculator, as a string. And I use this function, center, with an argument of 60. What that does is it takes 60 spaces and it puts this exactly in the middle of it. But the whole thing will take up exactly 60 spaces, which is nice because it allows me to be very precise about my line. And then it'll print, notice the commas, it'll print 9 more number signs. How many characters does this add up to? 9 plus 60 plus 9, 78. Why would I do 78 instead of 80 in this? Can you tell me? Right, exactly. When I pass this, remember when I pass print multiple objects, it automatically puts a space in between them. Now I can tell it not to, but I don't have to because I just don't. I could pass it that though, and then I could use precise numbers if I wanted to. That's fine too. By the way, these numbers here, this number here, you can put variables in there. If you put this as a string by itself, you could pass a variable into that so that you could change the line length or you can do some pretty interesting things. So just think about that. These numbers don't have to be hard-coded numbers. So this one, what does this give me? Yep, exactly. So 2 number signs, 76 spaces because I include the commas, and then 2 more number signs at the end. So those are just some common patterns. I highly encourage you to play around with them. By the way, these strings that repeat can be any string you want. So it could be 5 characters that you repeat over and over, or 3 characters. If you've got a pattern in mind, let me just show you real quick. So if I print this times 40, right, that gives me 80 spaces. And you can do little patterns and all kinds of things. Whatever gets you excited. I know, right? I could do the proverbial, what is it, the flower? I forget how to make those.
Isn't there one where there's like a O and then the slash? It's like the guy waving or something.
Yeah, there's all kind. You can look up all kinds of ASCII art. You can really go crazy with this stuff. I'm telling you. You can easily see how my other student ended up with rock paper scissors. They were really cool cartoon looking hands too. I wish I had saved that. Maybe I can go find it. It was really cool. But I always think it's fun when students take creative liberties with their assignments. Makes boring grading a lot more fun. So when we're talking about the advanced calculator, this is kind of what this, if I was going to make a flow chart of the program, this is what it would look like, right? I'm going to have a main menu that says choose 1 for this, choose 2 for this, and it's going to be an if, elif, else. Else is if they don't choose choice 1 or choice 2, then I tell them, hey, you chose something that's not valid. That's a good user interface right there. So choice 1, I'm going to then get their input for that calculator, do the calculation, output the results. If they choose choice 2, I'll do the same thing, get input, do a calculation, output results. And if I was making a more robust program, and next week we'll get into this, after all of these things, I'd come back and I would say, would you like to do another calculation? And if the answer is yes, I take them back to the main menu. If the answer is no, we just exit. So that's kind of where we're building toward with this. So tips for A4. I'm going to show you this in just a second, but I'm going to propose to you that you try making the structure using comments first before you do anything. And I'll have a template that will help you get started with this, but you can also do it on your own. I would recommend that as you get into bigger programs and more complexity, that you start with big chunks of the program, the bigger overarching structure, like I just showed you in the flow chart. So the big branches, what are those things? And then go back and fill in the specifics. So build the structure, then come back and fill in the calculations. To whatever extent you can, test as you go, debug as you go. Don't forget your debugger. This is still one that is mostly a personal preference to me for when I code that you may or may not like. But I prefer not to have my code just like line. I like to give space in between the groups of code as I'm writing stuff because it helps me just sort of wrap my mind around what I'm doing and where and how code fits together. And final tip, if you're copying code from Google, please make sure you understand what it is you're doing, okay? The point of the class is to learn programming. If you're copying and you don't understand what you're doing, whether it works or not, you're not learning very much. And we're still only on week 4 out of 16 weeks. Things are going to get a lot more complicated. So important to try and understand what it is you're doing, especially at these early phases. Okay? Yeah, that would be cool. I would be interested in seeing that. Speaking of machine learning, did you see that Microsoft released a new web browser with built-in AI? It's like Chat GPT built into the Bing search engine, which is probably still garbage, but it's interesting. But yeah, everybody's coming out with stuff right now. It's going to get real interesting in the next few months. But I haven't played around with it with Bing yet. But my son has, and he said it's really cool. Actually, they just interviewed his direct supervisor on the release of it, so it's kind of fun to see that. So anyway, back to A4. So let's start with the AI or the UI, not AI. Man, now I'm all sidetracked. Yeah, right. Okay, so here's my user interface. Here's my main menu. It's pretty generic. I'll admit it. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out these middle lines and make it a little more compact too, because then we can fit more onto one page. There we go. No, because a command line, the color of the command line is dictated by the environment, not the program. So unfortunately, not that I'm aware of, I'll say. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Yeah, I have mine set to white, so it's more visible on the screen.
Because in Windows, like when you program in batch,
Mm-hmm.
you can change the color of the echo.
Yeah, you might be able to. I would say find out. Also, I will tell you this: if you import the emoji module, you can use emoji here too. So if you want to get really crazy, yeah, you can use emoji, and it's I forget how the command works, but basically it's import emoji, but you have to have emoji installed as a module. So I'm getting an error there because I don't have it installed. But you can actually go to Python packages here and go emoji like this and install it, and then you can see how it's used right here. Just a pro tip in case you are really creative or just really like emojis, that's fine too. So advanced calculator, there's my heading. And I'm going to start here. I'm not going to write any more code. I'm just going to write comments. So first line comment, the first thing I want to do is I want to tell the user what the menu options are. Tell user menu options. Get user input for menu choice. So this is, I'm walking myself through, what does the program look like? If user chooses 1, go to Fahrenheit to Celsius calculator. Okay, so, and then we'll copy that because I'm lazy. There we go, 2, and we switch those around, Celsius to Fahrenheit calculator. If anything else, print error message. Okay, so there's the big structure of my program, right? I'm going to tell the user the menu options. In other words, choose 1 for this, choose 2 for that. I'm going to get the user input and put it into a variable. And then based on that, I'm going to go to one of these things. So as I start filling this in, it's going to be this is not good user interface, but you get the idea. And then I'm going to get the user input, str menu equals input, enter your choice. Ooh, there we go. I can spell. So then I'm going to do an if statement here. Str menu equals the string 1, because remember it's a string. Elif str menu equals the string 2. Else. Okay, so one thing you can do, notice that this is going to give me an error. And the reason it's giving me an error is because I have an if statement without an indented line of actual runnable code. So if I want to get rid of that just as a placeholder so that I can test my program, I can use the pass keyword, which basically is like saying pass when you're playing Uno or whatever. It allows you to have a legal indented line of code, but it doesn't do anything. It's just like a dummy placeholder. So make sure you get rid of that when you start doing things. Then I'm going to do F2C calculation. Okay, and I'm going through the whole program. I'm starting with the big choices, and then inside here I'm going to do one. Inside here I'm going to do one. In here I'm going to print a little error message. Don't kill yourself with too much complication in this space. This is really not about calculations. This is really about getting this structure and the ideas of indenting your code and how that structure works into your head so that you've got it sort of down. And then you can go back and add more things. Okay? So you could do like the area of a square and the area of a circle, or whatever you want. Keep it simple with the calculations. Okay? Any questions? Yes, sir.
When you're doing the empty space for the user UI and doing a centering command, is there